A polar bear entered the village and asked for help. People didn't understand what. One fine spring day, amazing news spread throughout the village that the residents had met a polar bear. How miraculously he ended up in this area is a real mystery. Polar predators live in the Arctic, but this huge beast somehow managed to teleport to the Sea of Okhotsk. In fact, the adventures of this polar bear deserve a separate story. It's hard to even imagine how many obstacles he had to overcome to get here. And the story was this: a polar bear went hunting for its next prey. The animal wanted to eat a fatty fish, so it tried its luck near the water. At first, the bear was cautious on the fragile ice, but then he became so carried away with fishing that he broke off a piece of the ice block with his weight. The animal did not want to plunge into icy water. The bear hoped to encounter some piece of land, but he continued to be rapidly carried away by the current. The polar bear was still very young, and the lack of life experience affected his inaction. Instead of returning to his native place, the young male traveled a long way, so he found himself in another region. No one can know for sure just how much time was spent on this unforgettable journey. It is likely that the bear could have swum to the islands in just a few days, but this is just a guess. And if the cold did not interfere much with a polar predator, then the feeling of hunger knew no bounds. As soon as the bear stepped onto the long-awaited land, he began to look for something edible. But the village turned out to be not the best place to feed such an exotic beast. In addition, people lived in the village, and they made unfamiliar sounds that scared the bear away. The predator was afraid of the local population, so it stayed away from residential buildings. Meanwhile, the hunger grew stronger and stronger. The uninvited guest had to change his decision, and the bear headed to the village. On his way, he came across a small house in which the family of a local police officer lived, but there was nothing to eat in the yard. Soon the bear lay down directly on the ground to regain his strength. At some point, he was spotted by a deputy police officer. The guy came to work with a senior in rank and found an unusual guest in his yard. At first, he was very scared, but then he pulled himself together and reported the situation to his superiors. After several phone calls, several more officers appeared in his yard. The polar bear was huge even when lying down. It was scary to disturb a large predator. Its size and sharp claws made people behave very quietly. The police tried to take a closer look at the animal, but every step was taken with great caution. Soon, local residents appeared in the yard. They also wanted to look at the polar predator. When else will they be able to see an Arctic inhabitant in person and so close? The bear continued to sleep, but at the same time made strange sounds that vaguely resembled a painful groan. Soon, one of the police noticed the unnatural position of the paw of the sleeping animal. Apparently, it was badly damaged. People didn't know how to help such a giant animal, so they contacted a specialist. Conservation officials were surprised by the news that a polar bear had been discovered in a local village. The specialists did not waste time and immediately headed to the spot. The police had to protect the bear and also make sure that it didn't leave the yard. The specialists arrived at the scene and deliberated for a long time. They even had to make several calls to more experienced colleagues. As a result of long negotiations, a verdict was reached. The polar bear must be returned to its small homeland. It is clear that a random guest couldn't cope with this task on his own. Village residents, together with visiting experts, began to think about it: how to return the bear to the Arctic. The territories near the Sea of Okhotsk could not become a worthy haven for such a predator. He needed another habitat. One of the nature conservation representatives said that this case was not the first in his practice. Periodically, polar bears are carried away on ice floes. Climate change and nutritional conditions have a detrimental effect on these animals. Most of them die, unable to adapt to new realities. Residents of the village unanimously began to repeat that this shouldn't be allowed. We need to figure out a way to deliver the animal to its usual habitat. After much thought, they came up with a suitable idea. Fortunately, there were many volunteers who agreed to carry out the rescue mission. Local officials made sure the bear was airlifted to the Arctic in a special cage. It took a little over a week to organize this event, but the rush could have ruined the plan. In fact, the deadlines were tight, so it was important to think through every step of the upcoming flight. Experts decided to anesthetize the animal to reduce the risk of serious stress. Soon the special plane set off on its fateful flight. At first, the flight proceeded in the most normal way, but what happened a little later made all the crew members pretty nervous. At some point, the bear awoke from the sleeping pills and began rocking the cage. The passengers on board didn't even understand who to fear more for, themselves or the animal. Such unexpected behavior of a predator could turn into a real disaster for everyone. However, the plane continued to fly without stopping. The animal's dynamics began to decline, and the reasons for concern gradually disappeared. Now the passengers were only worried about the condition of the animal. After a successful landing, specialists began to free the cage. The polar bear, although not immediately, confidently entered the snow-covered territory and breathed the Arctic air with great pleasure. For him, this was a long-awaited bliss. Soon the bear began to pick up speed and disappeared. This is such an amazing and touching story. Even northern polar bears can get lost and bump into people sometimes.